As if people in Texas didn't have enough Texas-based 2011s to be buying, Watchtower Firearms has teamed up with PewView to launch their Staccato XC we have at home, the Watchtower Firearms Apache. Welcome back to the channel. I'm David, and I recently got to see PewView's new gun at TriggrCon 2023. I got to handle it, and I got to shoot it on the range. The initial gun that they're launching, and they're only making 1,000 units of it, is a limited edition firearm, but speaking to the guys at Watchtower, there will be a production model to follow. It just will be different in some kind of way from what they're offering now. And calling it the XC that we have at home isn't really fair because the quality of the gun is very high. The biggest difference being that the barrel is a thread-on compensator and is not an island barrel like the XC, which is why there is the price difference. But before we get going, a real quick shout out to my channel sponsors. The first and foremost is my Patreon supporters. They are the hardest hitters on the internet. I think I've never met them, but they tell me that they are. And Optics Planet, where the code HUMM does absolutely nothing and you shouldn't try it. And several of you guys have been asking for the dad jokes, so I found another good one. So why don't blind people skydive? It terrifies the dogs. I don't know if that counts as a dad joke or not, but I laughed at it. Now back to the Watchtower Firearms Apache. It hits very much like a Staccato. It's very similar in a lot of the specs. It has a polymer grip. It has a commander length slide and barrel before a 3/4 inch compensator, so it handles very much like a 5-inch 2011. Be sure you're subscribed to the channel so you can see me actually do a comparison video to this when the production gun actually shows up for a longer, more in-depth review. But the Apache is cool in a couple different ways. The limited edition one is going to ship in a custom ammo can that has been laser engraved. It's going to ship with a 126mm mag and a 140mm magazine, or for normies, what that means is a 17-round magazine and a 22-round magazine. You have to grow a pretty good neck beard before you start thinking about magazine tube lengths in millimeters. Now it's important to realize that this was a prototype and there are going to be at least 2 changes that are in store for the production guns. First and foremost was the stippling on the grip module. They had kind of a standard like old STI style grip. The new ones are going to have the Watchtower Firearms logo in a slightly different checkering pattern. They assured me it's just as nice as the one they had on the gun. The second, possibly more interesting change is that the compensator on the gun is pretty narrow. They're going to actually open up the compensator so that it actually does more as far as venting gas is concerned. I don't know what effect that's going to have on the overall springing of the gun and everything like that. My guess is that, I mean, you can look at the comp on the XC, there's plenty of room before they start to get into spring issues. Some folks on the internet are already asking for the grip to be a metal grip, and no, 9mm minor guns make more sense with polymer grips. Those of you who don't shoot USPSA, the reason we started having steel grips is because 40 caliber 2011s were not the best thing in the world. We figured out we could bolt on steel grips to them and they held up a little bit better. Makes sense on a 40, makes sense on a 9 major open gun. On the minor guns, it's a more direct recoil impulse. Yes, you can get a more aggressive pattern on the gun, but you need it because the gun hits in the hand harder. It's gonna ultimately come down to preference, so get what you like, but I'm here to tell you I love the grip on the XC and I like the grip on the Apache as well. As far as spec is concerned, there is a very light trigger on the Apache. It is about a 3-pound trigger, maybe sub 3 pounds. There is only a single-sided safety. I asked about that, and that's actually Nick from the PewView channel's preference is single-sided safety. I tend to prefer ambi just based on my competition shooting roots, but there's that. Everything on the gun is PVD coated. Now I know some of you are going to think about the recent finish issues you've seen on other firearm manufacturers, and I can't guarantee that it's going to hold up, but that prototype, according to the guy at the show, is supposed to have over 10,000 rounds in testing, and the PVD looked almost as good as the day they put it on. And they're PVD coating everything in the gun, not just the slide and frame and barrel, but when I locked the slide to the rear, I noticed the disconnector was PVD coated, the safeties, the hammers are PVD coated. Obviously I didn't take the gun apart to see just how many of the mated surfaces are PVD coated, but they say they have a proprietary coating. It definitely increases the lubricity, reduces the friction coefficient of the metals. It has a very nice, very slick slide to frame feel. so I was very impressed with how the gun felt in hand. Fitting is exactly what you would expect it to be for a production 2011. It's fit tighter than like a duty 2011, like a Staccato P. It's more in line with what my XC has as far as coming from the factory. The slide cuts are kind of interesting. They have these like large cuts with these little micro texture pockets on the inside. They don't rub against your skin necessarily, but when you actually pinch them, they bite you back, and it's very easy to manipulate the slide. If you look closely at the barrel, you may notice the world burning on the barrel, and that's because they've teamed up with Atlas Gun Works for the barrels on the guns. The barrels are also PVD coated, and the coating holds up great on the barrel. I'm happy to report that they're using the Dawson Precision toolless guide rod, which is fantastic. It makes taking apart guns much easier, and I appreciate that. Shooting the gun is about like shooting a Staccato XC. I wish we could have more time with it and shoot some more at targets that weren't a single steel plate at about 20 yards. I don't know why they did that at the range day. Most people don't shoot pistols at 20 yards, but that's what we got to shoot at on the range day. It's kind of funny. I handed the gun over to Tony from the Laugh and Load channel on YouTube, and Tony has a switch for a trigger finger, and we watched him in slow motion do this. And you can see just how stable the gun is at full speed. There's not a lot of oscillating going on. Tony is able to run a gun at nearly 6 shots per second pace, so that is truly impressive. The optic on the gun is mounted on what I believe is an Atlas Gun Works plate, and it is going to come with the single RMR plate out of the box. I didn't follow up with the guys because I had to fly back, but the gun has a non-shielded safety, and because these guns have very slippery slides, if people are getting their thumbs onto the slide, I imagine they were choking the gun at range day. Since there's a lot more casual shooters at an event like that, I'm curious how the gun ran for them. On these kinds of guns, I would prefer shielded safeties, but I don't prefer it enough to go out and spend money and put them on there. Ultimately, it seems like a pretty darn nice gun as of the time that I'm recording this. Well, really as of Sunday, they had sold 400 of the 1,000 units they were intending to produce within about a week of announcing it. So if you want one, these are probably gonna go pretty quick. I was impressed with it. Ultimately, I'll probably end up with one in my collection eventually because I like to rep the Texas guns, and these guys are based out of H-Town. And remember, with H-Town, that H is for humidity.